Welcome back. Top Democrats are sounding the alarm that President Biden's re-election campaign is not resonating with voters as the president hits the campaign trail for the first time this year with remarks in Pennsylvania and South Carolina. The Washington Post reported this weekend that former President Obama voiced his concerns to Biden about his campaign strategy in a recent face-to-face meeting. And prominent South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn, who was critical to Biden's breakthrough win in the state in 2020 and introduced Biden before his speech today, is publicly warning that the president's message about his record just isn't reaching voters. Take a listen.
I'm not worried. I'm very concerned. And I've told him what my concerns are. I have no problem with the Biden administration and what it has done. My problem is that we have not been able to break through that MAGA wall in order to get to people exactly what this president has done.
And I'm joined now by Pennsylvania State Representative and a member of the 2024 Biden-Harris Campaign Advisory Board, Malcolm Kenyatta. Malcolm, thanks for being here. We appreciate it. The president, he's been campaigning on stopping Trump and extremism in the United States. Is that enough? Does he need to try and tell voters about his record of accomplishment in his first term and make it feel real to them? Does there need to be more to his campaign than just stopping Trump?
The president today gave another powerful speech that I think spoke to what this campaign is centering and what I think most people understand. Our democracy is the guarantor of all the other rights that we depend on. When we think about the right to make your own healthcare decisions, what is necessary to continue to grow our economy so more people have access to the American promise. When you think about what people who come from neighborhoods like mine in North Philadelphia, what we know needs to be done, the work that needs to be finished on making opportunities more easily accessible. None of that is possible if we don't protect and preserve our democracy. And that's the point that the president so firmly made today, while also talking about his record of success on everything from canceling over $137 billion in student loan debt, on his critical executive orders around policing, on the work that he's done around gun violence more than any president. This was the guy that got the assault weapons ban done. And as he said today, he's going to get it done again. And so I think the president is talking about his record of success, but he's also making sure that we never lose sight of the fact that we can't allow democracy to die on our watch.
Mm-hmm. But you heard Congressman Clyburn there. He feels confident that the president's done a good job, but he seems to be concerned about whether or not that is resonating with voters, particularly members of the black community. I mean, you could argue the black voters are the foundation of Democratic winning, the foundation of a winning strategy for Democrats, particularly at the presidential level. I mean, how concerned are you about the wavering support by black Americans, which, of course, is a key demographic for the Biden campaign?
Anybody in Democratic politics who's smart listens to Jim Clyburn, and I listened to all of what he said. And what he said was that he doesn't, believe that the polls are an accurate reflection of where people are, and that what the president did today is going to be critical to him doing what he did 4 years ago in beating Donald Trump once again. He talked about the need to show up and the president to personally and vigorously make his case for what he has accomplished and for what he wants to do when he's been elected to a second term. And that's why the president's speech today was so important, because he did that. He talked about cutting the cost of insulin to $35 a month, beating the pharmaceutical industry by allowing us to finally negotiate drug prices. And I'll tell you, Ryan, for me, all these things we're talking about are deeply personal. I lost both of my parents by the time I was 27. Both of them struggled with diabetes. They didn't have access to the type of health care that every single American deserves. And so to have a president who doesn't just talk about cutting those costs for all Americans, but has actually gotten it done, that's a record of success. And if we allow Donald Trump to appoint more Supreme Court justices, not only will we not have the continued work that this president has done on student loans, but a national abortion ban, which President Trump, and all the other Republicans have made it clear they would sign if it got to their desk, that Supreme Court would uphold it, just like they overturned Roe. So this president has given back-to-back speeches that has made it more clear to me than ever that not only do we need him for 4 more years, but he's ready for this fight, and he's going to win.
So let me talk to you, though, about the divide within the Democratic Party. And President Biden today was interrupted by ceasefire protesters today that believe the situation in Israel, with Israel and Hamas, has to need to come to some sort of a stop. You are a progressive member of your party. Are you concerned that the war between Israel and Hamas will lose Biden some of the left-leaning part of his Democratic coalition that was so important to his victory in 2020?
I'll point you to the comments that the president made during his speech, where he said he's doing everything he can to not only deal with horrific human costs, but continue to work all of the relationships that he has. And I think, as we go forward in this campaign, it should be clear to everybody that the president's deep and intimate knowledge of foreign affairs, the relationships that he has, his ability to work diplomatically to try to do everything that needs to be done in this moment. I'm grateful that we have him. This is not a president who's writing love letters to dictators or a president who, has made it clear he's going to stand with our adversaries like China and Russia instead of standing with the American people and the American worker. The president is making clear with these speeches, and, and I and others are making clear that this is going to be a critical choice. This is the most important choice that we are going to make as a nation, whether or not we are going to allow into the White House a guy who has said he's a dictator. And the other day, he doubled down. He went through a rambling story where he talked about, one of the Fox News hosts trying to help him clarify that he didn't mean he was going to be a dictator. And he doubled down and said, no, that's what I said. That's what I meant. This is the guy who overturned Roe v. Wade and is proud of it. This is the guy who instituted the Muslim ban and said he would do it again. This is the guy who wants to round up immigrants all across our country and put them into camps. And so President Biden is drawing the stark contrast that every voter is going to be faced with. Do we want somebody, like somebody said in that audience in Mother Emanuel Church, do we want somebody who is a good man, or do we want somebody who has shown no respect for our democracy, no respect for advancing a serious policy agenda on any of the issues that matter to me and to other progressives? Or do we want to elect somebody who has listened, who has advanced an agenda and created administration where our voice is prominently represented? And so I know what my choice is going to be.
Well, and your state obviously going to be crucial to all of this in Pennsylvania.
We're the center of the political universe, my friend.
Yes, yeah, you may be. State Representative and Biden Campaign Advisory Board member Malcolm Kenyatta. Malcolm, thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.